Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 319th New Social Environment. I'm Charles Schultz, managing editor at the Brooklyn Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation between Barbara Bloom and Tom McGlynn. We're also thrilled to have the poet Diana Hamilton here, who will read to close today's program. We've started all our events with two important acknowledgements. The first is that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. The second is an acknowledgement that Black Lives Matter. The heart of both of these acknowledgements is a commitment to the liberation of the oppressed and solidarity for all those who struggle for freedom, in recognition that when it comes to liberation, our histories never unfold in isolation. In that spirit, I encourage you all to check out the chat for a living document of resources and actions. And now to introduce today's guest and host. From Susan Tallman's essay in her book, Gifts. The elliptical, eloquent art of Barbara Bloom has taken on many guises. Films, posters, and books, installations and exhibitions that look like and sometimes are museum displays or movie sets or showrooms. The ribbon tying these apparently disparate works together is barely visible but tenacious. The artist's bottomless curiosity about the ways people converse through objects, assigning and manipulating meanings, passing them from one hand to another as stand-ins for love or desire or loss. Barbara will be speaking today with Tom McGlynn. Tom is an artist and a writer based in the NYC area. His work is represented in the permanent collections of the Whitney Museum, the Museum of Modern Art, the Cooper-Hewitt National Design Museum of the Smithsonian, along with other national and international collections. He is an editor-at-large at the Brooklyn Rail, contributing articles and criticism since 2012. His most recent show of paintings opened in February 2020 at Rick Wester Fine Art in NYC. Tom, over to you.
Thank you, Charlie. It's a real pleasure to be hosting this interview. Barbara, it was a pleasure meeting you earlier yesterday, and I've been familiar with your work since about 1989 when you did the Culture of Narcissism show at Jay Gorney. And then following that, the 1995 Pictures of a Floating World at Leo Castelli. So I do have some historical background with your work, but it was a real pleasure to see the current work at David Lewis. Because, you know, knowing those previous shows, I think those shows were coming at the tail end of a very kind of heavy atmosphere of theoretical criticality coming out of the 80s. And my reaction to the show, to your current show, was a little lighter, I think, because I wasn't necessarily, I didn't feel chastened by all of that theory. You know, I was able to kind of look at the show in a more direct way and kind of plug into the poetics of your practice. So I just want to say that that was my initial reaction to the show, which was surprising and welcome.
I guess at a moment like this, poetry is so useful and maybe comes to the forefront. That could have nothing to do with me whatsoever, and more to do with the time right now. But yeah, I always sort of, when people ask me what I do, I say I'm a conceptual artist, but that just always seems so inadequate because the work is so insanely visual and hopefully poetic. And so any of the didacticism that can also be in place with conceptual work, I try to steer away from that, I guess, partially with the beauty and also with the humor. So
yes, and I totally picked up on that. And another, probably the second reaction I had was that you were kind of acting like with your stand-ins, you're acting like Pirandello, you know, with 6 characters in search of a play or author. I think you have 7 stand-ins, but you know, the deploying of like Susan Sontag and Jean-Luc Godard and Joan Didion, those are so loaded avatars, and the way you deployed them, I thought was really interesting, and you deployed them in a very personal, poetic way, from my point of view. Interestingly, too, you know, when one thinks about stand-ins and objects and the idea of subjectivity, right? The idea of like an individualist subjectivity, one might, you know, in your tactic, assume kind of like a moving away from the subject, moving away from the author, but the author in this show comes through really strong.
The show is called Works on Paper on Paper. And Works on Paper has got to be the worst title for any exhibition ever, kind of guaranteeing that no one will go to see it. And I kind of wanted at first to call it Works on Paper, but then I did a Works on Paper because there's this backdrop paper, but also they're mostly authors or things that have to do with people who write or read, or so there's this element of paper, but they are in a sense kind of portraits, but they're portraits in a kind of, I don't know, in an oblique. They're kind of going about dealing with a portrait in a kind of a roundabout way. They're kind of the portraits of the placeholder for the people who are not there, and their objects left over. And, do you think it would be smart in a way just to kind of, because the people who are listening in now, oh yeah, there you go. Thank you. All right, so can you go back, start at the beginning with this? Because I think you're not at the first image, we're at the second image here. Well,
apologies, I think that first image is
all right,
here,
we'll just start with this one. It's okay, I can wing it. All right, so Tom, interrupt me anytime, because there's lots of pictures here and I don't want this to turn into a slide talk, okay?
Sure.
Yeah. So this exhibition started with a moment where I was looking back on a number of works, and the work started in 1981 with a piece that's called Homage to Jean Sieber, and you have to imagine yourself zoomed out here, but it's a black backdrop paper, and on the backdrop paper is a butterfly chair, a newspaper, and a striped shirt, and then leaning up against it is another backdrop paper leaning against the wall. It's kind of unfortunate to see, but you can imagine, zoom yourself back and sort of imagine this as a mise en scène of a backdrop paper. And I made this work in 1981. I'm going to kind of go a little bit slowly with this one just to kind of give you a sense of it. I was trying at the time to think about how I was living in Europe at the time. I was living in Amsterdam at the time, and I was trying to think about how to make a work which is filmic, but which stays still, but which in itself is not a video or a film, but how to imagine a work that would both stand in place, that would be like a sculpture, but that would insinuate time. And I came upon this idea of a backdrop paper, and that whatever is on the backdrop paper is a kind of a mise en scène. The things relate to each other, but it's also a sense that whatever takes place on that backdrop paper is not really taking place in the present. It's either going to happen, so it's a set for a photo shoot, or it's happened because it's a set and the model or whatever is now gone and it's left over from that. But it doesn't really, even though these objects are right in front of you, it doesn't appear to be taking place in the present tense. And it also as a kind of strange framing device, because everything that's on the backdrop paper becomes a kind of a character and a narrative. So it was both this way of framing objects together, but also having objects be both stationary and in place, but also not necessarily apprehended in that way. So let's go to the next one, and I'll just, without going too, oh yeah, we have to go back. These are not, okay, you're showing them two at a time, so that's not so good. All right, the next one is just a close-up of the image. We'll get there. Yeah, the next one up. The one before that.
Right.
There we go. All right, so what you've seen on that backdrop at that chair is the Herald Tribune. I want them one at a time if it's possible.
Apologies.
There
this is
that's
it's
okay.
a strange view setting right now. I don't know why it's doing two.
All right, we're good now. Thank you. Let's see if we can keep it like that. That's wonderful. All right, so on that backdrop is a chair and a skirt, and then also is a newspaper. And what I realized is that I was living in Europe, and what I realized is that when Jean Seberg died, that there would be an announcement of her death in the Herald Tribune, because that's what people, English-speaking people at the time, there was no internet, what everyone read. And I reprinted the paper, in which I insinuated, rather the image that was actually in the paper, I printed her image of her in Jean-Luc Godard's movie Breathless, selling the Herald Tribune on the street, walking with Jean-Paul Belmondo. And I inserted that image in the newspaper as the image that's about her death. And so you have this kind of closed circle of, I won't go into Jean Seberg, probably all of you know that she had this tragic life where she had kind of leftist politics and was hounded by the FBI, and all this rumors were insinuating about her life. Anyway, very tragic life. And I realized that I wanted to close the circle on her public mediated persona and her private life. And so the reprint of the image of her selling the Herald Tribune on the street with her Herald Tribune t-shirt was kind of like the ingenue, innocent girl who has like fallen through media and FBI mediation of her image. So it was kind of a portrait of her, but it's also the kind of the portrait of mediated imagery. Okay. And so then a little bit later, I made another work, which is called, that first one is Homage to Jean Seberg. And then the second one is, let's go to that one. Yeah, well, this is the new version of it. So this is an homage to Jean-Luc Godard, which is a chair on a backdrop paper. And then if we show the next image, that's an image which is you've seen on the wall next to it. And so if we go back one time, out of control here. So it's a backdrop paper, a chair. Next to it is an area which is painted the same color as the backdrop. And then let's go forward to the next one. No, to the yes, thank you. And so that's an image. That's an image of of a portrait of Jean-Luc Godard taken by the photographer F.C. Gunla, who was a fashion photographer, which was, as I was working on these what I called setups, as I was working on these backdrop papers, it was just kind of uncanny. I came across this image in Berlin when I moved there of this portrait of Jean-Luc Godard taken on a backdrop paper. And the nice version of the story is I bought the photograph, the first artwork I ever bought, and I made this artwork with it. And then it turned around that F.C. Gunlock turned out to be a collector of artworks, and he ended up buying my work. So he buying this work. So we kind of had this kind of, again, this kind of circular thing of worlds within worlds. Anyway, so I recently I thought about, although I haven't done this very often, I decided to go back to that format of these setups of these backdrop papers, and to see what I would be doing at this point, just to see with that language 30 years later, or is it 30 years later, maybe more, what the works would be like there, partially because the format still appealed to me as this kind of strange sculpture, not sculpture, mise-en-scène, not mise-en-scène, props, framing device, display device. Anyway, so I made a number of new ones, and that's what the show is, works on paper on paper. So,
Barbara, there's this great quote by, a famous quote by Godard about, that's probably applicable to your own process, in which he says, cinema is not the reflection of reality, but the reality of the reflection.
Huh.
So that's, for me, like, that's another dimension. You know, these figures like Jean Seberg and Godard, they're culturally overdetermined in their public image, but as artists, you know, a statement like that is very close to, it feels very close to your own sensibility as an artist.
Uh-huh.
Again, so it becomes like a portrait.
Exactly. Exactly. I think that when I for this version of the exhibition, there was a first version which opened in Berlin at Kapitän Petzel in March of 2000. I'm going to lose track of 2020, and it was supposed to open here in New York at David Lewis in May. A different version of it. It was like a parallel sister exhibition, part of it in Berlin, part of it here. And of course, that didn't happen. So I had a year's time between when the show was intended to be done until we actually opened the show. And, you know, my first, this is kind of reflecting on what you just said, that personal aspect of it is, you know, the first part is like, who cares about my own personal list of top 10 subjects who influenced me. It just seemed so, there was a moment where I just thought, this is so deeply unimportant for anyone else. So I have a hobby, great, keeps me off the streets, or keeps me, I'm off the streets anyway, but it keeps me occupied when I'm off the streets. But there was a point where I realized that there was an aspect of what I was getting at with these works, which is depicting something which is not there, or depicting someone who's absent. And that depiction of absence, which has been a lot of my work, became kind of important to do. I thought, okay, well, if that's going to, and you know, if I need some motor to get myself working on this. And so a lot of the show changed in some way in terms of the works that I was going to show here in New York. So there is a kind of a, maybe a bit more melancholic, somewhat more well, we can go on with that as I go through it. But there's the aspect of the absence of the person to making it a portrait, which is actually not the person, but the absence of the person became somehow, with all of the absence that we've been living through, kind of more important. So let's go to the next one.
It also hooks in with the subject and the death of the author, and the idea that there are no more grand narratives, there are only like petite, small narratives that are important in like a postmodern kind of scene. I think Lyotard talks about the grand versus the petite narrative that actually still holds. The grand narratives are gone; they're absent, and with them, the authors of those grand narratives.
Well, I guess I've never been one of the grand narrative. I guess I've always been on the petite side of the tug of war.
But what's interesting about your work, Barbara, is like someone could say that about the work, that you're kind of taking on these grand narratives by using these overdetermined figures. But I don't think that that's the case, but I could see that critique.
I think, when we'll go through them one by one, none of the people who I'm, I guess, depicting, which is such a strange word, or making a portrait of, none of them are really of the person themselves. They're an aspect of them, or an aspect of what it is about that person that's important to me. So in a sense, it is kind of like the best of a portrait, in which you don't get, it's not about the likeness.
Right.
It's about what about that person, or what about that icon holds us. These are people, like, these people hold me in some way or another that I can't get rid of. And so I'm in a way trying to visualize what is holding me there. What is, this next one is called The Sad Gray Story. And we'll get to the punchline in the end as to why it's called The Sad Gray Story, but it's a gray backdrop paper. It's got this strange bench on it, and that bench is called a posing bench. It's something that when professional photographers started in the 19th century up until probably still, that this was a style of a bench that you were made to sit on, that was made just for photography studios, for someone to pose on. And so you have this posing bench, which is the same, which is covered in a fabric, the same color. And then on the bench is, let's go in closer. That seems to be the same image again. All right, that's the larger one. Okay, it's a stack of books. And those books are, so this one is returned to my never-ending fascination with Marilyn Monroe. Almost every few years, there's just another work that comes up that's related to her. Kind of the never-ending icon and never-ending siren, or never-ending pool that you can project all of your fantasies on, or all of your understanding about imagery or about iconography or any of those things. She's just kind of the never-ending, for me at least, the never-ending, unattainable understanding of what was so appealing, tragic, enigmatic, brilliant. It just sort of never ends, the way that you can jump into the Marilyn Monroe pool of beauty and tragedy. Anyway, so these are, I've had a list of, from some auction or another, the 470 something books that she owned. And this is a stack of them. And you can see there are letters of Freud, there's Dostoevsky, there's Thomas Mann, Death in Venice, Das Kapital, The Fall by Camus, and Madame Bovary. So they go from dark to light, these books. They're dummy books. They're not the real books. They've just been covered they're just props on that little bench. And then the next thing is the next image. There's lots of images to get to this. You're not going to be able to see this, but there on the left is a color chart, a Benjamin Moore swatch of color. And on the right is the same kind of in the same line, the same light are images of Marilyn reading from dark to light. Marilyn had a lot of pictures taken of her reading. I think that was her chosen, if given her own devices, how she wanted to be depicted would be reading. There are hundreds of pictures of her reading. The best one's by Eve Arnold, but we can go into that. Okay, so the next image is kind of like the punchline of the whole thing. It starts with this color chart, and of course I don't have this in front of me, but this is a real color chart that says it's Black Panther, thank you, thank you, Gray Shower, Shadow Gray, Sweet Innocence, Marilyn's Dress, and Wedding Veil. I did not change that. That is a real, true Benjamin Moore color swatch. And when I saw that, I just thought this is the most poetic narrative. It's like a little Raymond Carver short story in the version of a color swatch. And so this piece is just called The Sad Gray Story. I don't think I don't need to go into the details of it, but it just, I don't think I need to say, if you want to say something, you can say something, but I think it kind of speaks for it.
What's interesting to me about, your deployment of the grayscale is it reminds me of another student of John Baldessari, Christopher Williams, and his deployment of generic aesthetics. That there's in his work, it's much more extreme. But again, it's about the disappearance of like the auteur artists, and there's a suffusion of the artist sensibility within the generic, like advertising for him.
Right.
And so maybe we can take this opportunity to talk about Baldessari's influence.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Since you both had him as a teacher, I believe.
I wasn't prepared for that question.
Sorry.
It took me many years to understand how influential he was on me. I think it's also, probably to the largest extent is the that I'm not going to be able to give this to do it justice because I really was not prepared. You know what? Can we hold on to that question and come back to it? Maybe there'll be a spark of brilliance on my part. I'll be able to do John justice, but
absolutely.
Yeah. I kind of feel like I don't want to just blah, blah, blah something and not say it, what I really think about the influence. But there's something about the roundabout way of going about coming to something. That again, I think John was a good example of making a very conceptual work, which was extremely poetic and also very funny. And it's funny is hard.
Yeah.
Funny is harder than it looks. Read a little bit of Seinfeld talking about humor and how perfectly that's constructed. It's hard to get the right tone with humor. So if anything, he may have given me permission to use some aspect of humor in my work. That would be the first thing I would say. It's
interesting that John makes the distinction between his humor and someone like William Wegman. Like he'll actually make a distinction there. That he's not as funny as William Wegman. But again, that's another kind of disassembly. It's a disassembly on his part,
Yeah. But that's we could go on for a whole, we could go
Sure.
on a long time
Sure.
about that. Let's maybe go on and then we'll
Absolutely.
come back to that. All right, so this one is called, all right, so this is one of the newer works. This one is called Susan Sontag, and it's just spelled with a capital S and a capital S, versus Susan Sontag, which is all capital letters. And so in a sense, is this person, author, thinker, a woman, philosopher, worker, versus the icon of who she was. And I would say that I'm infinitely more attracted to the non-iconic version of Susan Sontag, and quite skeptical of the iconic version of her, though she constructed it and did many, many things in her life or probably most of the things in her life was with that iconic in mind. So again, you were talking about the what was the word, the petite versus the grand?
The petite narrative versus the grand narrative.
Well, the petite narrative, Susan Sontag, in all of its specificity and all the brilliance of her writing, is the version of her that I'm interested in. The grand version, which is her iconic image and her constant, public presentation of herself, I find embarrassing. So this is a version. It's a black backdrop paper. Just on it is a pedestal, and on the pedestal is a kind of a covered mattress. Next to it is that same. Go back again still. Yeah, is the same pedestal again. I think of that as sort of the 2001 iconic monolith. And it's the sculpture, it's the monolith or something. So you have these things set up next to each other. So the next one is on the bed or on the mattress is a whole bunch of outtakes. They are the contact sheets, and these are Peter Huchar's photo sessions of her in many poses, but not, I mean, she's coquettish and posing almost nonstop all the time, but some of these are not those. And then you have one image which is circled, and then you see that image again in the next image, in the next slide. That's the iconic image of Susan Sontag that's used in so many places, and that's just propped up on top of that pedestal or that monolith. And again, without, I like to describe all of the details of it, but not kind of leave the narrative open for anyone else, because I don't really like to ascribe a particular reading of it. But if anything with this one, you have the outtakes and the images that have not been edited, and then you have the edited version of someone. And since she presented herself in the world as in such an edited manner, in a way, it almost was in against the argument that she had, because she was in some way a champion of the unedited, of the camp, of the underground, the pop, that she was always kind of a little bit ahead of herself in presenting kinds of art and kinds of work that could have been forgotten or could have been overlooked. And yet she presented herself and constantly as this finished iconic image. And
exactly. And I think it was Paul Feck's term, like stop interpreting, like against interpretation, which became a book title. But it was him talking to her, I believe. That's one, version of the story. It's like she was over interpreting, and he was saying, "Don't do that." And that's
I
one
mean,
interpretation.
right.
But there's also, I also wanted to introduce this idea of what you're saying about her as so vested in like projecting the serious public intellectual, and that she might have sacrificed irony for that.
Absolutely.
Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. She sacrificed a lot of things for that. I think she sacrifices probably the best of what her work was about, and the details and the specificity of it and the quirkiness of it. I think that, anyway, I wouldn't try, I went, this was a kind of a harder one to do. Wasn't like, I'm trying to, it's not a takedown. Obviously, this is somebody who is enormously important to me as a woman who is an intellectual, who gave that a possibility, gave me a possibility of somebody who, as someone who seriously thinks about what a photographic image is. How do we look at that? It was her work was incredibly important to me, and yet she was so problematic. So in some ways, I'm trying to give her a gentle, ironic, acerbic reading of her iconic imagery in this piece.
Yeah, I'm just bringing up the point, Barbara, because I think that there's a very precise irony in your own work. And I don't see this as a takedown at all, not necessarily an homage either, but it's interesting to think about somebody whose task, like Susan Sontag, whose writing is brilliant and lucid, the task of creating the serious icon of the public intellectual didn't allow her a certain play of irony, because one's self-conception, if the premise of one's self-conception is seriousness, then that's the result that has to be achieved. Like, there's no room for irony.
I guess maybe we could just say that was her that's her tragedy, that she chose that iconic image for herself and didn't, there's something very tragic about her, or or she just needed to be slapped down a little bit. I'm happy to do the job. So, like a kind of hitman here. So.
But also you're introducing the artistic relationship between her and David Hujar, which is really subtle. It's a subtle, there's a lot of subtlety here. It doesn't feel like a big slapdown. It's a lot of subtlety.
No. Okay, so let's go to the next one. All right, so this one is called Chairman Andy. And if we go to the next image, then we'll come back to this one. Okay, so this image in a non-colorized version, because I've andified these images. That means I tried to make them look like what Andy might have done with them. So this image appeared in the Sotheby's catalog of the Andy Warhol estate, which was Andy just sitting in a whole slew of chairs that he collected. And so let's go back one. So this appears on a stage, a very small stage, but a stage nonetheless. We found or remade or called Frankenstein, like put parts of them together, all of the chairs from that photograph. And then all of them have been painted out with a matte finish that I think of them as almost as they've been redacted. They're no longer real chairs. They are the absence of those chairs. Redacted is maybe the best word. They're just no longer, they're not there anymore. They're there, but they're not there anymore. And then behind them is a whole row of that image, which has been done as though they were Warhols.
And those chairs behind the specific chairs they're also very kind of quotidian. It looks like you'd see them in any ballroom in a Hilton somewhere. And again, they act just like the grayscale acted in the Maryland. They act as a datum for the quotidian, a datum for similarity versus the difference of the chairs in front of them.
I didn't think about that.
It's a very odd image because, like, the image of Andy sitting in those chairs, like, what's he doing? You know, it's like, is he at the auction? Because it looks like they could be auction chairs, you know?
Right. Go to the next image again, and you'll see the photograph.
It's bizarre.
Yeah. Well, I think they were maybe this was in the auction catalog, so
Right.
maybe they were just in a studio, or I don't really, or they laid them out, and I don't really know how.
Or maybe he just bought the whole set. He bought the whole set from, like, the renovation of the Hilton or something, you know?
You mean those back chairs? Yes.
Yeah, the back chairs.
The front chairs are very, very, very particular, and in trying to find them, buy them, get them, then it becomes very, very clear what he was collecting. You know, there's a Shaker chair, and there's a Windsor chair, and there's, you know, he spent a lot of time collecting.
Yes.
And so I like the fact that it's kind of a portrait not of Andy, but of Andy's collecting habits, or of Andy's serial habits. Or it's not really a portrait. It is a portrait of him, Chairman Andy, but it's also
Chairman Andy.
Chairman. That's the piece is called Chairman Andy.
It's funny.
Thank you. I thought so. So it's a kind of a portrait of his collecting. All right, so let's go to the next one.
There's a great quote by Jane Bennett about hoarding, you know, like the whole idea of hoarding. And she says, the things with which hoarders live and that live with them in close proximity are less possessions than pieces of self.
Yes.
So it's really a neurotic, it's a kind of it's a instantiation of neurosis.
Yeah.
Rather than taste.
I mean, we can go. Definitely. We can go into Andy in the same way we could go into Marilyn as, like, you know, just the receptacle of all of our understanding of his brilliance and his and his collecting as being some kind of a spin-off of his understanding of the commodity. And
right.
At the same time, I mean, we could go into all of that, but I mean,
it's a measure of, you know, how pregnant the work is.
Yeah.
You know, it's a measure of what you're kind of, you know, opening up to the viewer.
I guess I hope in a way, maybe with the exception of Sontag, I don't know whether she would predict. I hope that the people who I'm somehow depicting, like that's within very big scare quotes, would be pleased with my depiction, or at least understand it. I don't know whether Susan Sontag, that's a whole different story. But I think Andy might enjoy this. All right, so this piece is called The Problem with Joan Didion. And all right, so being a fellow Californian, she's probably, I could say she's probably the single most writer who's been of influence to me. And maybe we can come back to that in a little while with that, because otherwise I'll be just way too wordy. So this is a mantle or a fireplace. And then if we come a little bit closer, next one, it's based on a mantle that is in Joan Didion's Park Avenue apartment that has all these objects on it. And all of the objects here have been cast in glass, and they have an underlighting, so they kind of, they're luminescent. There's not very good images of this here, I'm sorry to say. But so that image is there almost like a footnote, and then we maybe go back one. So I don't know, maybe somebody can zoom in for us. Can you zoom in a little bit? So you can maybe a little bit more. Yeah, so those objects, yes, a little bit over. Yeah, so those objects are there, all cast and blown in glass. Almost in the same way that the Warhol chairs are not real chairs. These are not real objects. They are the, what would we say about these? If the chairs are redacted chair objects, these are the luminescent spirit of the objects. I don't know. I'm going to riff on that. You could probably do better than I can.
The White Album.
Huh?
The White Album.
They're the White Album. There you go. They are the spirit of, they are the spirit of they're, but they're also just these really tchotchke Park Avenue twee kind of objects. And that's the whole thing with Joan Didion. And that's just why this is called the problem with Joan Didion, is that, you know, throughout her entire career, there have people who've gone after her for her kind of upscale, twee, privileged, entitled way of living, and the fact that she doesn't, in some way, she doesn't ever leave that voice. But it's also an extraordinarily distanced voice where her forensic eye is also cast on herself. So I feel extraordinarily akin to the problems. I'm not going to say the brilliance of Joan Didion, but the problems in her, maybe you could say that the iconography or the use of language or the use of, people accuse me also of kind of an upscale and precious presentation of whatever it is. And I've had similar disagreements with the way that I present work. And what this work is the problem, you know, this is the problem with Joan Didion, and then there's the solution. So if we zoom back out again, it's not only her incredibly forensic particularity of what it is that she speaks. I mean, she is so precise. It's not only these incredibly beautifully constructed sentences that nobody can write a sentence like Joan Didion, but she can move in and out of in these beautifully constructed sentences with absolute particularity of what she's forensic particularity of what it is that she's talking about, but which I hope that I have some aspect of that particularity in my work. It's not just anything, it's very particular what I'm depicting. But
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm wondering if you were conscious of the whole narrative of her and John Gregory Dunn making fires for each other, like in her narrative of the Year of Magical Thinking, how that was like their intimate, you know, nightly thing that they did. Because this is a mantle. I mean, but the actual fireplace is kind of missing.
I had forgotten that completely. Of course, maybe that's in there somehow, but thank you really very much for that.
It's
no.
Uncanny. I think it's uncanny. I mean, it's there, you know?
Yeah. That's it was very interesting because when we made this fireplace, I was working with Arthur Gobio, who has been working with me for many years. And we had long conversations about the detail of the fireplace, because it had to be enough of the detail that was kind of crazy trying to get the exact fireplace that she had, so that the tooling and the rosettas and all that stuff had to be close enough to what we could see from a photograph, but that a lot of it is just left blank. And then we decided that the area where the actual fireplace was is that that's kind of like a Donald Judd sculpture. It's just a
Right.
minimal, it's just not there.
Right.
I really like that when depicting stuff, the place in between very, very precise details and then where it's left blank. And I'm hoping that there's some kind of parallels with Didion about that particularity of things and where it kind of breaks open into something which is a larger, more philosophical argument.
Yes, and it's like the documentary forensics versus the aesthetics, or the what would it be called, the ideology of form. The ideology of form in her work, just like Susan Sontag's, is so specific. You kind of know when you're reading a Sontag or a Didion sentence, or you have that reference. But then there's the documentary aspect of the work, right? So you're reading through this like incredibly aesthetically, honed thing, just like Sontag's public persona. And then, you read something like Slouching Towards Bethlehem, which is horrific, take on Haight-Ashbury in the 60s. So,
yeah, I think that there's something, I think I don't want to go out too far on a limb, but there's something about being a Californian that I so relate to with Joan Didion, because I'm a Californian, even though people don't know that about me. But there's something about growing up in a place where whatever it is that you're discovering, and maybe that's everything outside of a large city, but maybe that's everyone who comes not from the East Coast or not from Europe or not from a cosmopolitan situation. But growing up in California and being a Californian, there's some kind of permission to follow your own particular train of thought and give it seriousness and give it prominence, historically. So when Joan Didion is writing, she's not writing with, Susan Sontag has Walter Benjamin in the backdrop of her every single sentence she ever writes. She's writing herself into history.
Right.
With every single thing, she's writing herself into the icon of the public intellectual. She's writing herself into European history. Every single thing that comes out of her mouth and out of her pen and out of her typewriter or whatever is gauged against this all historic argument. And that is not true for Joan Didion. Joan Didion is not to say that she wasn't reading other writers, but it's her own particular voice trying to come up to terms with what it is that she's seeing and understanding, given a public voice, given a platform in which she can try to figure out something and we can be privy to her trying to figure that out, which is a very different argument. And so I sort of feel like, okay, for years and years that I am on the Joan Didion team. I'm absolutely on that team where you can try to grapple with what it is, what am I understanding, what am I seeing, what is the personal, what is the political, what are the subjects of the times, that those things are very muddied and grayed, and I think that she was criticized, and now not so, but for a long time, and they're just scathing reviews of her work. We're talking about her
who she dresses,
the way that she dresses, or the way
right.
That I take very personally. Like, okay, bring it on. It's like, bring it on. I'm gonna come up. I'm gonna argue for that one. But with this piece, with the problem with Joan Didion is the problem, and then I've come up with what I think might be a solution. So if you see on the right there's something on the wall, to the right on the wall, and if we zoom in, so we go one, yes. And what that is, it's a 19th century tear vessel, and a tear vessel is something that was, started in ancient times, there for collecting tears. they are a receptacle for mourning and for for the holding of the fluid of tragedy. So I guess I could argue with Joan Didion is that there's always this kind of floats on the wall next to her whole upscale apartment, Park Avenue existence, always is floating this incredibly fragile vessel for the tragedy.
Right.
And this is actually a real vessel. It's probably from 19th century. And you can see in it, there's some dried stuff, which could be perfume, but also could be tears.
Right.
So
No,
that's
it's true. It's true. Like there's this lurking tragedy in all of her work.
all of it.
And then it becomes personal at the end when her daughter and her husband die.
Yeah. But she in a way, her entire life is spent, maybe you could say her entire life, writing life and thinking life is spent trying to come to terms and to write through these very difficult, complicated, tragic, impossible narratives. And then she just turns that on her own life in a way that, that's the part where everyone can't believe that she can do this. But true lovers of Joan Didion say, well, of course she can do that. That's what she's been doing for 40 years, is the ability to take that distance to take that distance and closeness at the same time to what it is that she's doing.
Right. There was that quote of hers, I understand my life by writing it.
Yeah.
And, all artists can identify with that, right?
Right. So this is the love story. This is a gift for her. All right, so let's go to the next one. All right, so this is another work which came to be only during the last year. I've had a long time trying to think about making a work for my husband, Chris Mann, who passed away in 2018. And I just went for it, like all mid-COVID, thought, you know what, fuck it. I'm gonna go for it and see if I can come up with this. And so it is it's sort of a tombstone, I guess. I mean, it's made from stone. So there's a pedestal, and on it is a stone. And then if we go to the next image, so it's a stone, and on top of it is another stone. And if you zoom in on that, I'm not going to try to explain to anybody who Chris is. If you know him, you know. If you knew him, you knew him. But he was a writer, poet, performer. And so the tombstone says, "Tell them I said something. Last words of Pancho Villa," and then in parentheses, according to Chris Mann. So it turns out that "Tell him I said something," Chris always said that those were Pancho Villa's last words, and that those were by far the best last words of anyone, because it's sort of it could be read in different with where the stress falls. You could tell them I said something, or tell them I said something, or tell them I said something. There's all different ways of reading what that means. It could be kind of exasperated or touting your own horn, or there's many ways of saying it. And it turns out that it's probably apocryphal, that he actually didn't actually say that, which I'm sure Chris knew, because Chris was not really into the fact was not a big important part of anything he said. He mixed fact with non-fact freely and gladly. And it took me a long time. We were married for many years. So it took me a very long time to stop fact checking him, because that wasn't the point of it at all. I mean, that would have been a full-time job to fact check Chris Mann, who rhymed everything with everything and told all kinds of stories that were partially true or maybe not. Anyway, and then if we zoom out a little bit, there's underneath the stone is a tiny little video of him. It's actually a rehearsal video of him just rehearsing, and it's with his hands, but everyone who knows Chris and knows his work or knows his person knows that he had this incredible flighty butterfly movement of his hands that just flew all over the place as he talked. But there's this little video of him taken from above of just his hands moving and his hands something. So this is, I guess the piece is called According to Chris or According to Chris Mann. It's a prototype of maybe a tombstone for some, it's somewhere, or a sculpture, or it's a in-between thing, but I wanted to, maybe I'll try it again, a different version, but I wanted to make something. He was a voracious reader with probably 10,000 books and reading, 5 or 20 books all at the same time. Anyway, so that's that one. All right, so now we're going to go into something different. All right, so this is at David Lewis's other space on 12th Street. This is called Deconstructed, and then parentheses blow up. And do we have time to even show the video? How are we working with time here? I can just kind of describe it, or we.
We're okay, I think.
Okay, so the piece is, all right, so
like, I think we could show the film. I'm not sure.
Let's show the video right now. So this is, it shouldn't have sound, and I could maybe talk over it, right? So this is a little snippet of blow up. These girls show up in his studio. Oh, I think it's slowed down, but it's okay. We've got it on some kind of slower. All right, well, we're looking at this forensically. It's not this slow, but that's okay. It's all right. It kind of gives you the. And when I originally saw this, as a teenager, I thought of it as, and this is coming to the scene right now, I thought of this as this kind of fabulous 1960s romp in a studio, and kind of innocent, and all of my friends and I immediately went out and bought clothes like those girls did. We had tights those colors and dresses like them. And it was only in re-looking at this, because I was thinking about the backdrop, and I thinking, oh yeah, there's that whole backdrop thing in Blow Up. I should go back. And I looked at it and I thought, oh my God, this is just horrific. It's just the closest thing you could have, like, to a rape scene that isn't actually a sex scene, but it's just horrible. And so, it's clearly a violation of these young girls, and at the time was invisible to me, in the same way that a lot of things, when you look back on them, are. Anyway, so let's go back to the image of the work if we can. And so the description of the work is that it's, all right, so what you're seeing is, so there's a backdrop paper. Then on the backdrop paper, let's go to the next image, is a crumpled up backdrop paper. And then 2 backdrop papers, sort of a little unfurled, kind of like the girls and their tights. And then in front of it is a camera with a playback. And it's not even an attempt at looking that it would be a camera of the time. It's a camera from now. And in the camera, in the playback of the camera, is a loop of that scene. So it's called Deconstructed Blow Up. So we're seeing the prop is showing us the original, and we're seeing some kind of remnant of that thing, of that work, or of that art, or of that film, or of that artwork. I don't know if I should say something more. Maybe you can say something more.
Well, I mean, viewing it in the kind of very posh locale, wasn't a white box. I think David mentioned that it's, it would be read very differently in a white box.
Right.
So this locale is maybe similar to like Lord Snowden's studio on Pimlico Road. And that's, I think, what maybe Antonini was referring to. That kind of swinging England kind of whatever sybaritic kind of moment in England and London's history. So I think that the setting was like really important because you have this mise en scène, and then you have the actuality of the placement of it on West 12th Street, and it embodies it. It makes it more embodied than it would be if it was. It situates it in a more embodied way than it would have been in a white box.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right.
I also mentioned to David when I saw the tripod setup that it reminded me of Michael Powell's 1960 film Peeping Tom. Which is a very odd film. It precedes the Antonini, but it's also this place of the photographer's studio as a place of trauma, and it brought up those associations.
It's I think that in a lot of ways, without it being too didactic, I think I'm really often going at how to look at a photograph. I mean, I've gone about it in many different ways, in many different aspects, in many different shows. But this one, how to look at in this case, a film, how to look at a photograph, how to look at this is a photographer's studio as depicted in a film, as depicted in a mise en scène, as then depicted in a redo a contemporary version of an MP4 on a video screen or something, like all of the tropes of depicting something,
right?
It's, or the Susan Sontag in the outtakes versus the iconic image, or the Joan Didion photograph as versus the 3D version of it in a kind of a sculpture, or Andy as a inside of his photograph as opposed to this redacted. There are all these kind of going over and over and over again, or the dark to light images of Marilyn, or the Andy or the Jean-Luc Godard in his chair, taken by the photographer and then redone in this version. They're just kind of, I'm going to argue this, and then that can sound really pretentious, but in the same way that I'm sort of trying to figure out loud, in the same way that Joan Didion is trying to figure out loud with her gorgeous sentences, what it is that she's seeing or what it is that she's looking at, even though I can't do it in the erudite way that she does. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to figure out loud in public, without quite knowing what it is that I'm grappling with here. There's some kind of open-endedness, I hopefully with this. There's some kind of including someone who's looking at with me like, hey, what are we looking at here? What are we getting to here? That I'm trying to get to over and over and over again. And hopefully in that, it's the kind of curiosity and obsession, and hopefully that hooks someone in to come and look at it with me. Does that make any sense to you?
Of course, yeah. And also this piece is loaded with political residue. You mean the political, which particular political residue? Well, the trauma of abuse and feminism, prior to feminism, and the distancing, the instrument of distancing from trauma, from the site of the actual.
Yeah.
It might not be traumatic, but maybe these days, since we're so geared towards Instagram, the actual is traumatic. It doesn't even have to be a traumatic incident, just the actual itself is traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, those are the kind of things that the work brings up for me. It's not necessarily like this postmodern distancing where it's, smarmy, postmodern distancing, but.
Did you say smarmy or smarty?
Smarmy or smarty. But again, like I said at the beginning, like I was pleased that it's not, because, I'm so inured to that from like coming up through the 80s and all of,
Right.
I'm not against theory, but when it dominates poetry, I don't like it,
No, I'm on the poetry team, definitely. Let's go on. Let me just finish. I'll try to go a little bit quicker with these. These are okay. So these are not works on paper. Well, they are works on paper, but there's a whole category here which I call objects of desire. And as I go through my life, I'm interested in collecting, and I've done all kinds of things that are related to the whole thoughts about collecting, but I'm not really a collector. I find interesting stuff, but I'm not a real collector. But there are things from time to time that it's like, oh man, I really want that. They're just so good. And so these are those objects. These are my objects that I want. So I think you're like, if I want them, maybe you want them too. So let's go through them. So the first one is called, and each one of them has a particular kind of a display device. So this one's called the Bokov's Collections. And let's go to the next one. I'm going to go these a little bit more quickly. This is, it's a butterfly collecting case. And the back of it, the bottom of the case is an image of one of his diaries from the 50s, where he's out in the West collecting butterflies, but he's writing in his diary about where so he's writing Lolita at the time, and he's obsessing about where he was planning to self-publish it because he could not get a publisher for it. It was just too complex and too radical and too risky for anyone to publish it. So he was going to self-publish it. And he's obsessing in his diary about where the manuscript is and where the key, it's in that place, and the key to it is in that drawer of that place. And he's writing this in his diary about where Lolita is. And then on top of that is pinned, almost like they're specimens, many different versions of the covers of Lolita. There are hundreds of different copies and editions of that book. And so these are different copies, different versions of the covers of Lolita. We won't go in there. Some of them are really brilliant and smutty and funny, and some of them are tragically bad. And okay, so that's that. The next one is this is one's called Barth's Exercises. So this is an object that he had in his, or let's say it's a facsimile of this. So all of these are facsimiles. The next image is from the photograph, where you see on the right there is that little, some kind of watercolor aquarelle little table he had. He was an amateur artist. And the next one is, so the photograph is in the right side of that little table, and on the left side is one of his, a reproduction of one of his not particularly good amateurish gouaches. And it's so fabulous that he was an amateur and not a very good amateur painter. I love that, someone is erudite and who could write so gorgeously. It's so fantastic. He kind of made these kind of mediocre abstractions, particularly since he wrote so much about Twombly and could not, come anywhere near he wrote a lot about Twombly and about the automatic writing and about all kinds of stuff that he wasn't really able to do. But I find it so sweet and charming that he tried his hand at it. You can see here, it's just has a glass on top of it, and it's like, it looks like there may be 7 or 8 or 9 pieces of paper, all of different colors, as though he has a whole stack of them in there. This is just one of them. So this is this one is Bart's exercises. The next one is so there's another case, and there's a little, it's a plinth with a little strange little display device on top of it. And then what is in that one is the next image. That's called Austen's pins. These are pins that she used for, if maybe we zoom in a little bit, you can see there's numbers in there. Maybe you could see without zooming in. There's numbers that, these are the pins that she used for editing her text. And these are facsimiles that I got from a photograph that we kind of bronzed them and made them darker and got them in, they're pinned into a piece of paper. So this is how she edited her text. There would be tiny little pieces of paper, and then she would go into her text and pin corrections into her text. That's how she edited her text. So these are Austen's pins. And then the next one, this one's like a little child's, it's on a pedestal, so it raises it up, but it's like a child's school table. And then there's the next one. So there's a book in there, and then there's a mirror at the bottom of the thing, and it shows you the title of the book, which is Complete French Verbs. And this is Jackie's French Verbs. This is a book that was auctioned in Jackie Kennedy Onassis's Bouvier Kennedy Onassis's estate sale. This is a book that she had when she was probably, I'm going to guess, maybe around 12 years old, when she was in boarding school. Next image is her, and this is her French verbs, where she's conjugating verbs together with kind of girly, insipid girly drawings in the middle of her French, and this is again a kind of like, just like the other dummy books. I often have kind of dummy books. This is her dummy book of her Jackie's French verbs. And then the last one is, oh no, the next one is, oh, I don't have the pedestal for that, but that's okay. This is, if you can zoom in on this one, this is Andy's Doodles. This is a book. This is a book that I've only seen the image of the book. It's varieties of adjustive behavior. It's a psychology part 2. It's some psychology book, and it's opened up and it's just doodled in like crazy by Andy Warhol. So this is Andy's Doodles. I mean, come on, you've got to want that. The fact that it's a psychology book is just so incredibly funny to me. This is like, maybe this is more than any of the other ones. It's like, I see that, I want it so badly that I had to make a facsimile of it. It's just that page, the rest is blank. Although the book it does have the title. All right, and then the last one is, it's a kind of strange pedestal stand, lectern stand, and on it is James Joyce's schema, which is his schema for Ulysses, that he made several of these. These were the ones where he's mapping out the different themes in the book. I'm not going to go into detail of it, but this is also, this is again a facsimile of it, and we go into the detail of it. But he's mapping out the understanding in terms of the color and the title, the color, I think it's the house, the organ, the art, the color, and the symbol that related to different parts of the book. So he's just got these through lines. This is a clearly genius person who has all of this in mind as he's writing this book, and he's mapping these things out as he's doing it.
And he also, yeah, he made a couple of these not to be published for his friends, right? Because his friends were like,
these were not, yes.
how do I
these were-
figure, right, how do I figure this out? And he's like, oh, this is the key, you know.
Yes. This is what's going on.
Right. It's so poignant, you know, that he would do that.
Yes, and he said several times to these people, these are not for publication. And not only did I make them, they're not for publication, but I faked them. So they're pretty good facsimiles. I mean, all of these are pretty good facsimiles. I'm very good at faking things. All right, so I think that's it in terms of what the images are. So we can, it's kind of a mouthful there. So hit me with it.
Thank you, Barbara. I think we'll take the opportunity to open it up to general questions, but this has been really a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope there's some questions.
There are questions indeed. And I also want to thank you, Tom and Barbara, for that really stimulating conversation.
Thank you.
Our chat bar was really alive throughout much of it, commenting on the artworks that people were looking at and the ideas that were put out. I've captured a few from the chat. Unfortunately, because of the circumstances, some people weren't able to stay for the entire time, but fortunately we archive all of these. So there's a couple of questions from guests who left, but who will be eager to hear the answers when they watch on YouTube. However, our first question today is going to come from Lisa Beck. Lisa, I am going to ask you to ask your mic to turn on. There we go. Oop, try that again. Hey, Lisa, you there?
Yes. Did it work?
Hi.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Barbara.
Lisa. Hi.
Lovely to see you. Well, first I'm going to say that the thing that I love about your work so much is that while there are layers upon layers of thoughts and associations and jokes and intellectual commentary, it's also just delightful to look at. And, you know, your sense of design and your care and the exquisiteness of it all is just delicious to me. So I'm just curious to know a little bit more about your thoughts on this integration of kind of beauty and sensuality of the objects in conjunction with this thoughtful content. I mean, I know you've said you're on the poetry team, so I get that, but I don't know. I'd just like to hear more about what you think about that. Is it just instinctive, or are you really aiming at something with it?
You know, don't you hate it when they say that's a really good question?
Of course, it
But that's a really
may
good
not
question.
have an answer. That's okay.
No, I do.
I just wanted to say hello mostly.
Hi, hello there. You know, each of us brings with us certain things that we kind of know how to do,
Mhm.
or that, you know, I couldn't make a sloppy, messy artwork if you like if you had a gun to my head and say make some punk work. I just don't know how to do that. I just can't.
Right.
And so so there's something that occurred to me along the way, that if you make something extremely beautiful and seductive, that you can pull people in and get them to stay a while looking at something. And as they're looking at something, all kinds of layers of things that get pulled out from underneath them, or all kinds of difficulties, or all kinds of problematics of whatever it is that you're looking at, can be layered in there, because you've got this seductive gorgeousness that's holding people there. So I'm truly a mean person.
No, you're not.
Well, I mean, there's a kind of a cruelty there that you
Wow.
bring them, you know, well, there is sort of there. I'm fully aware of the of beauty as a tool,
Mhm, mhm,
or
mhm.
as a device to hook, is a hook.
Sure.
And I think that we use those tools. And I kind of sort of feel like an analog thing on an old record player, that you have like the knobs. Well, the knob of difficulty is automatically connected to the knob of beauty. And if you turn up the volume of difficulty, the knob of beauty just goes up. They're just in tandem with each other. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
does. It does. I like
I'm
thinking about it as
I'm
a
on the-
lure
Yeah.
or bait.
Yeah. It's bait. Yes, that's a good one. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Hi, nice to see you.
I know. Nice to see you too.
See you soon. Bye.
I hope so.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Barbara. Not to carry that fun too much further, but I can't resist saying that I was hooked when I went to see the show.
Okay.
So our next question comes from an audience member who had to leave to go teach their class. She asked, or rather she stated, "It seems like your process allows for quite a bit of serendipity. Is this true? If it is, can you describe a moment in your research process that was particularly surprising or illuminating?"
Man, I could say again, great question. I'm a researcher, and I couldn't do what I do unless I just love, I love production, and I love the research of trying to figure out how to make these things. And very often I have an idea of how something is to be made or what it should look like. I have it in my head. And then the practicality of making it, the work kind of talks back to you at a certain point. There's a point where it kind of has its own life, and it kind of tells you what it wants to be or how it wants to be. Like, for instance, the Andy Warhol, I wanted to have all of these have backdrop paper. I wanted to have all of these works appear on backdrop paper. But the Andy or the Joan Didion or the Chris Mann, they just don't want a backdrop paper. They reject it. I mean, they just can't have them. I guess you could have them, but they just said no. I will not. There will be no backdrop papers here. So that's like, maybe that's sort of an example of it. There's a part where the work, it's not like Pinocchio comes to life, but it's where the logic of the work I've set it into place, but then the logic of the particular piece and the particularity of what that work can be and what it can't be can tell you how it wants to appear, as almost as though it's a living, it's not a living entity, but it has its own logic. I'm trying to think of a better example than the Andy. That's the most obvious one that those pieces didn't want. Oh, I don't have an image of it, but on the chair where Andy is sitting in that piece, there is a Savage backdrop paper sample chart. I didn't take a picture of that because I thought I was going to be too wordy to try to describe every aspect of it. And I put that on the chair. It was it sat, it was on my wall for a very, very long time, that chart, just to pick the colors of the paper. I tried to pick the colors of the paper for Andy. It wasn't. And I realized how much like that chart is like a Warhol in the seriality of it, and it became kind of like the collection of color standing for Andy as a personhood. So that was kind of a serendipitous moment where I thought, oh yeah, I could just leave it on the chair. Is it there? Is that part of the piece? Is it part of, maybe we're just thinking about they're having backdrop paper, but they never really showed up? Is that sort of an answer to that? I guess
I think that's a great answer. And to be honest with you, it verges into this other question that was left behind. A lot of questions about your process. Oops, lost my earpiece. A lot of questions about your process. This next one, if you don't mind, it catches a little bit of what you were just saying, but kind of moves in a slightly different direction. This person was commenting on how the stand-ins seem so perfectly articulated, and was curious if if the works emerge as a completed piece, or if there's a lot of sketching that and like idea burning that happens in the process. And you had already started going down the road of it not all appearing fully formed, but maybe that's not true for every work.
Some of I'm kind of a slow worker. I like to have a lot of time. Things are on the back burner for a very long time. So for instance, I knew with the Sad Gray Story that I had already written about the Sad Gray Story, and Susan Tallman had already written about it with me for this book I did about gift wrapping, and I made a gift wrap paper of that color chart and of the Benjamin Moore color samples. And then I was thinking, okay, here we go, Marilyn again. But the things kind of tiptoe, then what would be the word I'm looking for? They creep up on me. I'm not very good at forcing myself into making artworks. I'm much better if I know that I have a project that I'm wanting to make there's going to be 10 of these, or there were, that went together in Berlin, and there were like 15 of these things, some of them old and some of them new, and how if they slowly over time, they kind of emerge, but there's a certain point at which I kind of like have to tackle them. And then I make them. I don't ever see them until they're done. I mean, I see them inside my head, but I don't see them until they're installed in the gallery. I don't have a place where I don't have a studio where they are set up. I have a desk. So I don't see them until you see them.
Maybe I could take that question a little bit more specific and just ask about Lolita. For example, you had mentioned that there are many covers. I'm sure some of them you discovered as you were going through. How did you think about which ones would be the butterflies in the piece?
Oh, okay. That's a particular one, because I've done also, I have the Maryland thing, but I also have the Nabokov, who's my far better half. He does everything in terms of doubling and stuff like that. I've done, I was very lucky in the end of the 90s to be asked by Glenn Horowitz, who had procured the entire library of Nabokov, his own books, of which there were hundreds, at which he purchased from Dmitry Nabokov's son. And before he sold the library off in different parts and different sections and individually in his groups, he had an exhibition which I got to design. So I got to see all of Nabokov's books with their annotations and their writing and notations and writing. And he was, and I got to look at all the Lolita covers, and I got to design a Lolita carpet, and so that's an ongoing, that's an ongoing one. So I've designed a Lolita cover. There was a Lolita cover contest in which I was a juror. So I've done a lot of works of designing book covers, because I like the kind of sense of the secondary or tertiary way that that imagery can show up as a design and something else. Anyway, I don't know that. That's probably, I'm skirting your question. So
nice work, Barbara.
Nice skirt.
Nice skirt, yeah. I'm going to pass the mic to, forgive me if I mispronounce your name, Agnes Catuli. Agnes, I'm going to ask to activate your mic.
Yes, I activated. Yeah, I'm sorry to ask again, maybe about the backdrop paper, because I'm sure everyone asked you, but I really like the way you titled the exhibition. So works on paper on on paper. So I just wanted to ask you to explain a little bit more about like the title and about the backdrop paper, why it's so important in your practice.
Okay, I don't want to hammer it in, but the works on paper, it was sort of the framing of the framing, which I do, I do this thing where I frame another frame. So that was that. I mean, works on paper, as I said before, is the world's worst title of a show. I mean, it's just a terrible title. And I find that like when I told David Lewis, or when I told Keys Le Capitaine, I want to show that's called Works on Paper. You could just sort of see their eyes rolling like, oh my God, that's just horrible, that title for a show, which I find, like, what is it, like dogs in art? I mean, it's just a terrible shot, like the depiction of dogs in art, or, motherhood. I mean, those are horrible titles for shows. So I kind of liked having a really bad title, but it's the works on paper. So it's again that the thing like I'm doing with the framing of something on a backdrop paper. I'm framing it also in the title. I don't know if that makes sense to you. And then the backdrop paper, I think I tried to explain that. I can maybe try again. It's a framing device. It's a way with a color or something telling you this is what you're going to look at. But it's a very odd thing to do because it's a sculptural framing device in which everything that's on that piece of paper has some kind of importance in the way that you read the relationship between those objects. It's a kind of perfect way to call attention to making sense of, or reading into, or finding a narrative, or finding meaning in those things that you've placed on it. And then I talked a little bit earlier about the temporality, that it's not meant to be looked at now. It's meant for something else other than what we're looking at now, which I find endlessly amusing. So does that help?
Thanks, Barbara. Thanks, Agnes. We have time for one more question. I'm going to pass the mic over to my colleague, Nick, and then Diana, we will be coming for our poetry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Barbara, for bearing with our technical details.
Oh, no worries. We got it.
But we made it. And this kind of popped in my head as we were looking at the last image of the Ulysses, of sort of how he was determining colors per each thing. Some are kind of much more straightforward, of course, like the gray one, but my very specific question is, why did you choose yellow for Godard?
Oh, that's a very bad question. I don't know. Maybe one of you has a theory, like incredibly insightful reason. I don't know.
Or we can keep it mysterious.
Yeah.
Well, in the nature of being on team poetry, let's leave the beautiful enigmaticness of being in a space of not knowing as a wonderful space where we can transition. As many of you know who've joined us for one of these 319 episodes, they initially came out of our lunchtime conversations. At the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our lunches with poems, and we have brought that tradition into our new social environment. I'm thrilled to welcome our poet laureate of the day, Diana Hamilton, to our Zoom stage. Diana Hamilton is the author of 3 books. God Was Right. Excuse me. Something about that choked in my throat. I'm sorry, Diana. God Was Right by Ugly Duckling Press. The Awful Truth by Goliath Books, and Okay, Okay by Truck Books. Diana, over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to read the poem that just came out in the June Brooklyn Rail called Behavioral Therapy. Although now I'd like to retitle it that Warhol book, Varieties of Adjusted Behavior. I think it's actually a better title, but for now it's Behavioral Therapy. I got up at 4:28 p.m. Kawara writes to Lepard, and I write to you today. with a nice feeling of sheet on skin, before I noticed the hives produced by oversleeping. It's depressing to rise at a reasonable 7:32 in a Mississippi Holiday Inn, no less, and I'm also skeptical of the pleasures afforded by his earlier morning, so this is the best of his postcards, stamped November 1st, 1969, then again 2 days later by the USPS, traveling by weekend and 5 cents on the back of Birdseye to avoid the 26 minutes in human view it would take to walk from East 13th to Prince, I note, hands between knees. With a bedded sense like one I had 3 years ago, post-drugs, August 17th, 2018, recorded in group text to a friend's ex and a now ex-friend at 10:32 a.m. My text read, I am lying such that if you drew a line from my right breast down the rib and the soft belly that doesn't protect organs and over the pelvis, past the flat front of the right thigh, over the knee in Sharpie, tracing the ridge of the shin and arcing the right foot, the line would be straight against the surface of the bed. My left leg is wrapped over me and under the right, its foot coming back up from the bed's surface so I can scratch it. The legs pull something between them taut enough to cause arousal, despite the upper layer of my brain peeling off or trying and a painful Band-Aid separation. The cat is between my arms, so is the pillow. It's hard to explain, but if I don't move, if I almost hold my breath, the pain stops, and it's thoughts. Still, it's impossible to imagine I don't have any regrets, but I want more. For the back and front to push down on the bed at once, I need a second bed on top, second gravity going opposite way. I need a falling dream, a shock that replaces the, if I have many more mornings like this, I'm not gonna have many more mornings feeling. Today, I feel the same, but there's no stimulant cause. I stayed up late thinking about childhood, that's all, so my gums bleed, as when I made the face of judgment, breaking my toe. Experts say I manifest all symptoms of stress, those of the bowels, the skin, the mouth, the head, the endocrine system, the nerves, the spine. Because I was kissed, I cried. You get it. I washed with scented soap despite the orders of the foot surgeon, which led to dreams of rape, the reasons my genitals now run dry, and so on. My stomach convulses if I fail to spit. My stutter returns when my mother calls. The mold grows on the shower, causing my back to spasm, especially when I keep a secret. Because hives, if they arrive with sweat, can indicate allergic reaction to one's own body, I sit in bed, avoiding exercise, which is how I got here, why I have time to visit the archive of my refusal to move. As in 2 New Years ago, January 1, 2019, a dream that ended with me looking inside my window at a woman who was not me, still in bed, watching me pull a baby raccoon with a lemur's tail off a rabbit calico I had mistaken for my own monster. It's why I ask you now to learn that bed rest causes vitamin D deficiency. I know you believe that I'm not sick, merely suffering from a disease of the imagination, maybe, or of bad habits. So I take a moment to remind you and doctors that blood's no less real for having been brought out with the encouragement of thought. Now I'm calm briefly, waking from a dream where my therapist, with my encouragement, cancels our session in order to play in the snow. This gives me energy to walk out into the sunlight myself and watch my cancer take root. There's some animal doing the dance it's known to do when it gets to see the sun, and if, in imitating a squirrel or blue jay, I distract my body sufficiently that I experience some reprieve, this is not an indictment of my failure to have danced sooner, but of life for making dancing infrequent, a symptom somehow of societal advancement, which asks us to wait until 1:30 a.m. or intoxication to lift our arms over our heads, unless we've paid for a gym class. Thrust the hips if we have access to that movement. And if we don't have access, there's a chance this was also planned by some asshole's idea of advancement. Bob the head, put a foot in an unproductive direction and then pull it back, keeping time, taking the hand of someone and using it to rotate their body if they'd like us to lead, or to rotate our own if they'd like us to follow. That's it. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Diana. That was a really, really wonderful poem. And thank you, Barbara and Tom. And thank you to our audience. Thank you, everyone, who tuned in today and for your questions. I hope you'll join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation between Laurent Grasso and Donatien Grau. We will conclude tomorrow's with a poetry reading from the wonderful Sandra Simmons. You are now should be able to activate your microphones and say farewell as we sign out for the day.
Hi, Barbara. It's Martha.
Oh, hi. Hi, Martha.
Nice to see you. Thank
Nice
you
to
for your
see you.
talk. It's great.
Thank you.
Barbara.
Thank
is-
you
Thank
all.
Thank you, Barbara. Thanks, Tom.
Oh, wow, this is
Thanks,
really
Dan.
great to see all these people.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara.